Now that we have an understanding of how visualization can be helpful during reading, let's see how it actually works. In this lecture, I'm going to go ahead and read at a very slow pace and describe the kinds of visualizations that I generate and try to describe them in vivid detail. And then I'll be mapping them and I'll try to find Google images that somewhat come close to the markers or visual images that come to mind for me. Now, if this lecture is a bit overwhelming, don't worry. I'm going to explain how and why I chose the visualizations that I did in the upcoming lectures, and then we'll return to some practical examples and demonstrations. This lecture is merely here to provide a demonstration that we can later deconstruct together in the coming lectures. So for this demonstration, I'm going to use a Wikipedia article on the Garden City movement. Now, typically Wikipedia articles are very dense, so this example is a pretty rigorous and challenging one, and it'll give us lots of opportunities to generate markers in a very short amount of text. So the first thing that I notice, obviously, is Garden City movement. Okay? Now, I happen to live in a garden city of Tel Aviv, so I picture Rothschild Boulevard, which is a very green area, and I'm picturing a specific block and in front of a specific restaurant that I know, where the trees are particularly vivid and green and full of life. The next thing that I'm going to notice, obviously 1898. It's actually tough for me to come up with a marker for that, so I don't particularly come up with one. The next thing I'm going to notice, you see these camel case and this link, I notice Ebenezer Howard. Now, Ebenezer is a pretty rare name. I only have one neural node for that name, and it's Ebenezer Scrooge, so I come up with an image of him. I'm picturing an actual image in my mind of Ebenezer Scrooge, which is familiar to me. You may picture the version of Scrooge that was in the cartoons you watched as a kid. Next, I notice United Kingdom. I actually don't come up with a flag of the United Kingdom here because sometimes for me it's confusing with the other flags of the Commonwealth, which all have that Union Jack symbol on them. Instead, I actually come up with a map of England specifically, but kind of an entire map of the United Kingdom. It looks like this. Next up, I see green belts. That's pretty easy. I come up with a green leather belt. And particularly, I see it on a pair of blue jeans, but a green belt is a good marker in general. Let's move on to the next paragraph. I notice immediately the word utopian. I immediately see a white marble city square with a big round fountain in the middle. I see this in very vivid detail. I don't really have anything for looking backward, but I kind of picture a guy in a top hat who's looking over his shoulder. Now I notice Henry George, okay? By connecting to existing knowledge, I realize that those both happen to be the names of British kings. And this works really well for us because it will remind us that Ebenezer Howard was British. And so I imagine an image of King George during the king's speech. I'm imagining, by the way, the father, not the son. Now moving on, for progress and poverty, I actually see children during the Great Depression, and they're standing in line. Now let's keep reading. Garden cities of tomorrow. Okay, so I already have a marker for the Garden City, and so that comes up again. Now if we keep going, I have 1902. I happen to know that there was actually a World's Fair that was supposed to happen in New York, but that was canceled, so I'm envisioning that a canceled World Fair would probably look like people rolling machinery and equipment back into a warehouse looking disappointed. Now, 32,000. That's kind of a strange number. Oddly enough, the first thing that comes to mind for me is that it's roughly 32 gigabytes, and I actually picture an iPhone 3GS because that's a product that comes in a variant of 32 gigabytes. For 6,000, nothing particularly comes to mind very quickly. All right, let's see. 6 radial boulevards. Okay, that's interesting. I actually picture a hub and spoke, kind of like a wagon wheel, though the one that I'm picturing has only 6 spokes. And radial is the word that I want to remember here. Now, for boulevards, I picture the planned community where I purchased my first home, which was called Boulevard. What else do we have here? What else do we have here? It's worth noting, by the way, that we have these images on the side, and these can actually serve as really, really great markers as well, not to get distracted. We have a cluster of several garden cities as satellites. Okay, that's an important point. Now, for satellites, I actually picture a giant space telescope, the Hubble Space Telescope. It's probably a kind of strange example, but you might think of a communication satellite more readily. I have a very vivid image already in my memory of what that satellite looks like, so that's easy for me to come up with, and I just jump to it right away. Okay, let's jump into early development. Howard's Tomorrow, A Peaceful Path to Real Reform. Okay, Peaceful Path. I want to remember that because that's the title of his book. Well, I actually picture here an Israeli and Palestinian flag. It's kind of my personal marker for reform and peace because it's a highly emotionally poignant point to me. But you might picture an olive branch. Now, another one of his books, this is an important detail. Okay, Garden Cities of Tomorrow. Again, that same marker of jumping back to Rothschild Boulevard, but here I immediately, after this, jump to overcrowding and deterioration. Okay, overcrowding, that's important. I actually see a huge square of people pushing and shoving, and it's just complete chaos. Now, let's keep reading. I hope you're reading along with me. Working class. Okay, that's important. The first thing that comes to me here is actually someone in very dirty overalls. One of the straps of the overalls is kind of let loose, and it's like the overalls are kind of hanging off of his body. And I can literally see the dirt under his fingernails. Maybe he's a coal miner. I can actually see his particular hairstyle. It's kind of like someone out of the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? So again, this is a very detailed image that comes to me. You'll notice, by the way, that sometimes I skip over particular words or concepts like 6,000. I couldn't come up with something very quick for that, and so I just chose to make a marker for 32,000 instead. You'll also notice that I took very particular details. They're not generic or fuzzy images. So now I have Henry George in my memory. I have 32,000 in my memory. I have overcrowding in my memory. And all the other markers are there too. So now I just need to play back these detailed images, and what that's going to do is give me an overall picture of what was happening during the time that the Garden City movement was promoted. I now can deduct from the details to know that it was a response to overcrowding, it was a response to criticism from the working classes, and it was a response to the criticism that cities were becoming too overcrowded. Okay? I also know from my marker of 1902 and my marker of Ebenezer, I know who was doing the promoting and what was really bringing this movement to life, and also where it was happening. Okay? I even know the basic principles of how garden cities are designed just by reviewing my markers. Now, let's deconstruct this demonstration and see just how it works. Just like I mentioned before, this might be a bit overwhelming just because it's a little bit advanced, and Wikipedia articles, like I said, are way more dense than the typical stuff that you'll be reading. It's kind of like watching a gymnastics teacher do a backflip before explaining to you how he did it. So if you have seen how visualization works, that's great. We're going to deconstruct it and explain each component of it in detail in the coming lectures, and it'll be a lot less overwhelming when you do it with less dense materials than this Wikipedia article.